No other city in New England is more closely associated with this country's beginnings than the hometown of Nathaniel Hawthorne, Salem, on the Massachusetts coast, just north of Boston. From its founding in 1626 to the present, the sea has been the dominant force in Salem's development and has influenced every aspect of its life. Here, in an area of 1/2 square mile, live the past and the present side by side. From tangible evidence of earlier times to modern condominiums and pleasure boats tied to wharves which were once the home of great sailing ships. Pioneer Village, an authentic recreation of the first settlers' primitive community, is testimony to their courageous commitment to establish a permanent community in the New World. The Peabody Museum of Salem, founded in 1799 by members of the East India Marine Society and the oldest continuously operated museum in the country, exhibits displays which illustrate the town's marriage to the sea from its earliest fishing days to the time when it was one of the great seaports on the Atlantic coast, bringing treasures from all over the world to a new country on its way to becoming a great nation. The Essex Institute, along with its distinguished historical library and exhibits of Essex County artifacts, preserves many of the lavish houses of merchants whose fortunes rode on their ships. These, together with the houses on Chestnut Street, said to be one of the most beautiful streets in America, are among the finest examples of federal architecture. There are relics, too, of earlier and more somber days. The stark 17th century homes of the first Puritan settlers, whose religious fervor led to the persecution of innocent people during the witchcraft trials of 1692. The story of this tragic event is told at the Witch House and the Witch Museum. No building, however, more eloquently speaks of Salem's maritime tradition than the Custom House, now part of a National Historic Site. At these wharves, rich cargoes from Africa, India, the Pacific, and Far East were registered. Enough taxes were collected here in the early 1790s to fund 1/5 of the entire federal budget. It was here, too, Salem's most famous son, Nathaniel Hawthorne, while the port surveyor tells us he found the tattered bit of embroidery that gave its name to the classic story, The Scarlet Letter. As America's first internationally acclaimed author, Hawthorne also found inspiration in a landmark only a few blocks away. The Turner Ingersoll House, now the only remaining 17th century mansion in New England, was transformed by his famous novel into what is now one of the best-known houses in America, the House of the Seven Gables. Now part of a complex containing 2 other 17th century houses, as well as the house in which Hawthorne was born, it is preserved for all time and toured by visitors who come here from all over the world. Our guide for this visit is Vincent Price. He will begin with Nathaniel Hawthorne's birthplace and then lead us through the House of the Seven Gables.
On the second story of this mid-18th century house, Nathaniel Hawthorne was born on the 4th of July, 1804. From the time of the Revolution, the Hawthornes had occupied this house, bought by Nathaniel's grandfather, Captain Daniel Hawthorne, about whom a popular ballad, Bold Daniel, had been written. Here in the modestly furnished parlor, Nathaniel's parents would entertain friends and family, passing time in lively conversation, discussing Salem's rising prospects as an international center of maritime commerce. Still present is a tilt-top table, once owned by the family, and a brass lantern clock from Ipswich, England, made in 1610, only 20 years before the earliest Hawthorne arrived in Massachusetts with Governor John Winthrop. Through the door, we enter the back parlor or captain's study, where voyages were planned and business details discussed in private. Here are displayed some objects which reflect the family's connection with the sea, a watercolor of the ship America, on which Nathaniel's father served as first mate during a voyage which brought to Salem, among other rich cargoes from the East, the first elephant seen in this country. She was an unusual beast. After having endangered the ship's supply of fresh water, she was provided with quantities of beer instead, a beverage she was unwilling to give up after her arrival here in 1797. After climbing the narrow backstairs, we enter the rear or children's bedchamber, where it is likely that Nathaniel and his sisters spent much of their time. The tall child's chair was owned by the Manning family, while the bed, though not a family piece, accurately reflects the type of framed, rope-strung bed used during the time the family lived here. The small front chamber served as a spare or guest room, although persons confined by illness or childbirth might have used it as well. It was in this room that Hawthorne was born. The spare and simple furnishings reflect the rather limited means of the family at this time, while older pieces such as this three-panel chest echo the family's 17th century roots in the community. Sadly, Hawthorne's mother was forced to sell the house in 1808 when her husband died of yellow fever while on a voyage to South America. The probate inventory on display shows us the meager estate she inherited, which left her with only $649 after all her husband's debts were settled. She and her children returned to her father's house on Herbert Street, where young Nathaniel was raised. On the other side of the second floor, we may see the great or master bedchamber, where in happier days Captain Nathaniel and his wife slept in an elegant four-poster canopy bed. Just beyond is a dressing room where a washstand and a set of Manning family furniture is displayed. These beautifully preserved pieces were owned by Hawthorne's uncle, Robert Manning, who became a surrogate father to Nathaniel after his real father's death. Descending the front stairs, we enter the kitchen, which features a brick fireplace with 2 brick ovens. Here cooking was only a part of the ongoing household activities, which included the informal entertainment of guests, childcare, and dishwashing. Crumbs which fell to the floor attracted mice kept in check by household cats, or by tin cats, such as this humane mousetrap, which served as a small cage during a mouse's period of imprisonment. Crossing the formal gardens between the Hawthorne birthplace and the House of Seven Gables, we are able to enjoy one of the area's most outstanding displays of flowers and ornamental shrubs and trees in a traditional setting. Upon entering the Gables from the garden through its massive batten door, we pass through the central hallway and see Hepzibah's Scent Shop, a recreation of the small shop opened by Hawthorne's character Hepzibah Pynchon in his novel. In this way, the visitor can understand that the house has 2 distinct dimensions: the residence of the Turner and Ingersoll families from 1668 to 1882, and the setting of Hawthorne's famous story. Beyond the scent shop is the darkly paneled kitchen with its bake oven and fireback cast in 1662, which has been in the house since it was brought here by its builder, John Turner. It is one of only 5 cast at the nearby Saugus Ironworks, and it is one of the finest examples of its form to survive from that foundry. In this kitchen, too, the Turners' servants and West Indian slaves would have prepared meals for Salem's wealthiest household of the 1600s. From the kitchen, we pass through a dark passageway beside the great central chimney to the dining room. Here we leave the house's colonial past behind and see the remaining rooms as Hawthorne himself did. He often visited his cousin Susanna Ingersoll here in the 1830s and 40s. On the right, as we enter, we are met by Susanna's portrait as she appeared in about 1840. She was the last of the Ingersolls to live here, having inherited the house from her father, Captain Samuel Ingersoll, who had purchased it from the grandson of John Turner in 1782. From the age of 10, she had lived in this house and died here in 1852, unmarried, in the place she referred to as her prison. The dining room contains many reminders of Hawthorne's cousin. The chairs around the table were hers, as were many pieces of porcelain in the cupboard by the fireplace. Her father's maritime career is reflected in the abundance of blue and white Canton porcelain, and in the oriental paintings of Macau and Canton, the only 2 ports open to the China trade. It was often in this room that Susanna entertained her young cousin during his visits. She was surprised at his remark that there was nothing about which he could write. She suggested that he look around the room. Then, pointing to an ancient chair that had been in the family for generations, she suggested that he write about it, through the many people who had sat in it. The result was one of Hawthorne's most successful collection of children's stories, Tales of Grandfather's Chair. Most important, however, was a tour of the great house Susanna gave her cousin, during which she mentioned that it had 7 gables. Hawthorne was much taken by the idea and promised to make something of it. Game playing was the most popular pastime during Hawthorne's visits here. Whist, backgammon, chess, and checkers all helped to pass the evening hours. Nathaniel's checkerboard is in the dining room cupboard. Directly on the other side of the fireplace is a wood storage closet, which usually contained a large supply of seasoned firewood. But it was discovered in the 19th century to contain the entrance to a narrow, secret staircase. It rises up through the central chimney and leads to a room on the 3rd floor. Its real purpose we do not know. Was it used to hide a member of the Turner family who might have been accused of witchcraft in 1692? Might it have served as a cache for smuggled goods to avoid the high import taxes? Or perhaps it was part of the Underground Railroad by which runaway slaves were transported to Nova Scotia or New Brunswick to escape recapture. The staircase opens out into an attic chamber which closely resembles the room described in Hawthorne's novel as the bedroom of Clifford, Hepzibah's brother. In reality, however, it served as the chamber of Horace Connolly, Susanna's adopted son, whose dark and brooding portrait hangs near the fireplace. The garret beyond the chimney contains a variety of objects that would have been stored here by Susanna. Toys, though no children lived in the house at the time of Hawthorne's visits, and spinning wheels, long outdated in the sophisticated seaport of Salem. Perhaps most interesting of all is a wooden model of the house. It shows the evolution from John Turner's modest structure of 1668 to a more elaborate building by the 1680s. Finally, during the ownership of John Turner II, it became a veritable mansion, the only remaining example of such 17th century architecture in New England today. Here, too, we see the ancient timbers which frame the house, carved by hand from oak and joined together by wooden pegs known as trunnels or tree nails. These formed a flexible skeleton over which housewrights stretched a sheath of weatherboards and clapboards. Against the wall rests a vestige of that bygone era, all that is left of John Turner's original front door, complete with hand-wrought nails in the medieval diamond or hatchment pattern. Descending the attic stairs, we come to the second-floor hall and enter the master or great chamber. We are now in the last addition to the house, constructed in the 1690s. At once we are aware of the sunny and cheerful character of the room, with 3 of its walls pierced by great double-hung windows. It is known as Phoebe's room, as a reflection of young Phoebe Pynchon in Hawthorne's story. She comes to live with her cousins Hepzibah and Clifford and brings light and sunshine back into the dreary old house. The Sheraton field bed was owned by the Hawthorne family, while Susanna herself made the delicate sewing sampler and owned the walnut veneer chest of drawers. The wall to the left contains a panel which can be opened to reveal the original timber frame of the room, which was once exposed. But in 1720, it was enclosed behind the present paneling by John Turner II to conform to the latest fashion. Finally, on either side of the mantel are Hawthorne family portraits. Rachel Hawthorne Forrester, aunt of Nathaniel, and wife of wealthy Captain Simon Forrester, a noted Salem privateer. Sophia Amelia Peabody, at the age of 28, wife of Nathaniel, an accomplished artist. And finally, Hawthorne himself, as he looked at the age of 36 near the time of his marriage and the beginning of his career as one of America's most famous literary figures. Leaving the great chamber, we descend the front stairs and enter the parlor. We are still in the 1690s edition, but the beams and support timbers are hidden behind the paneling added in 1720. Here we meet members of the Turner family, John Turner III, his sister Eunice, and his daughter Mary Turner Sargent. Here, too, we may view Hawthorne as he looked at the age of 56 in his last portrait. The desk below was owned by Susanna and favored by Hawthorne during his visits, as was the leather-bound chair. The hand-carved shell-top cupboard displays a number of popular 18th and 19th century ceramics: blue and white porcelain, Liverpool pitcher, pink lusterware, and Irish glass. These are only the outward and visible elements of a relic of our earliest Puritan history. What remains unseen but perceptible is the cumulative presence of those who actually lived in it, as well as those who did so only in Hawthorne's imagination.